Hey, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Rocks. In this episode, we're going to do something kind of cool. We're going to add a hit test listener. Right now, if I were to run this program, we'll notice that the program does run, but when the bullet hits the enemy, nothing happens. And so we're going to have to do some things to change that. Essentially, the heart of this is going to be a method called hit test object. And so that's a part of the movie clip class. It's a method. Since my bullet and my enemies both extend that class, I can use that method with either one of these. And so I'm going to use it with my bullet class. So let's go ahead and take a look at my bullet loop. And if I come back here to PhatKids and I look into my bullet loop, let's see, I make a bullet. Here's my bullet loop right here. So what I'll do is in here, I'm going to create a nested for loop. And so a nested for loop is essentially a loop inside of a loop. So I'll have these two loops. In the outer loop, I can traverse all of my bullets. And then in the inner loop, I'm going to go through each of my enemies. And so what that means is, as I go through each individual bullet, I'll check that against every one of the enemies. Then I go to the next bullet, and the inner loop will check against every one of the enemies again, and so forth. And if any two bullets are touching, remember, this is happening 30 times a second, which would be very tedious for human beings, but computers can do this very, very quickly. So there's going to be a little bit difference in this for loop, though. The variable that I'll do again is going to be I, and that will be an int, and I'm going to set this so that it will be equal to bullets.length. Now I'm not starting this one at 0. I'm starting it at, it's going to be equal to the length, and I think this needs to be less than 1. We'll go ahead and check this. I may have to change this to equals 1, but, or I'm sorry, is equal to length minus 1 is what I wanted to say. So that's where it's going to start. So it's going to start at the end of the array, and it's going to move backwards. And to make it move backwards, I need to stop it when I hit 0. So I'll say we'll keep doing this until as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. And then we are going to, each time I do this, instead of incrementing it, I am going to decrement it. So I'll start at the very end. I is going to be equal to the length of the array minus 1. I is going to be greater than or equal to 0, as long as it's greater than or equal to 0. Remember, 0 is the last index of any array, and then I go I minus minus. So starting at the greatest index and going all the way back to 0. I'm going to do the same thing over here for my enemies, and so my enemies, I'm going to do a variable j is going to also be an int, and that is going to be equal to enemies.length. And what I will do for this guy is almost exactly the same thing. I want to say minus 1 here, and I will do this until j is, as long as j is greater than or equal to 0, and then I want to do the same thing and say j minus minus. Okay, so now I've got a couple of if statements. The first if statement is going to simply check and make sure that both of these objects exist, because if either one doesn't exist, that's going to be a problem. So the first one is going to be bullets bullets I, and if that does not exist, if it does not equal null, then it does exist, and that's good. I'm going to use my AND statement because I want the other one to also exist, and that's going to be enemies, and the index I'm using for enemies is j. So again, if that does not equal null, then it exists, and now I can come in here and do what I want to do. And so what I want to do is, if they both exist, I want to check and see if a particular bullet is touching a particular enemy. And so to do that, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to use my hit test object. So first of all, I'll use bullets, and I'll say bullets I, which is each of the bullets in the bullet array, starting with 0, or starting with the end and going all the way back down to 0. And I'm going to use a method in the movie clip class. If I say hit test object, and then I use parentheses, and inside here I'm going to say enemies dot, or enemies, enemies j. Okay, and that should be it. So if they hit each other, I can test this by putting simply a trace in here, and I will say, for instance, Hey, you hit me. Okay, there it goes. So let's run this and see what happens. If I don't have any errors, it'll run. I've got a bunch of errors, so let's see. It says I got a problem here, and jint enemies dot length. Oh, I've got a dot right there. So that was silly. Let's try this again, and now it runs. Okay, that one little dot made a whole bunch of errors. And notice now that when the stars, when the bullets are hitting a particular enemy, I'm getting this message over here, hey, you hit me. So there's 4 things that I want to do. Okay, so now I know I'm traversing all of my enemies, I'm traversing all of my bullets. When 2 of them touch, hit test object is noticing that. It's giving me a true. This is just a method that gives either true or false, but if this guy is touching this guy, it gets true. So I'll come in here, and instead of a trace statement, I'm going to do 4 things. I have to remove the enemy from the stage. So I'll say enemy from, actually I think I'll just say parent. So we don't know what the parent is going to be up front, but in general we're going to move it from the parent. And I'm going to also remove, and instead of the enemy, I guess we'll do the bullets first. So since it's in the outer loop, and I should have the word bullets here, remove bullet from the parent, remove bullet from the array. And it's important that we do it in this order, and I'll talk about why perhaps in a minute, but essentially I want to do the same thing now for the enemy. So I'll say remove enemy from the parent, and remove enemy from the array. Now the reason I wrote the word parent here is because one of the things that's kind of fluky about this is that hit test object must have whatever object this is and whatever object this is to test if they're hitting. They have to have the same parent. And so right now they actually don't have the same parent, because if you will remember down here in init enemy, I've actually added the enemy to the play area. So I need to change that to this. And this is going to be PhatKids. Okay, so I'm adding it to this, and the reason is I had to add bullets to this. When I created my bullets, let's see, when I go to init turret, here's make bullet, notice I'm adding the bullet to this, I'm adding the turret to this, and I also need to add the enemy to this as well. So the enemy is added to this as well. Okay, so coming back here to do this, to remove bullet from the parent, all I need to do is I need to say this dot remove child. So I say remove child and say what I want to remove. So I'm going to remove it from the stage before I move it from the array. If I reverse this order and I remove it from the array first, then I'll be removing a different child from the stage, and that will be a problem. So to remove a bullet, I just simply say bullets, and I use my index I, and I'm going to remove that guy from the stage. Now that I've done that, I'm going to say bullets, and I will take the parameter. Actually, I'm going to use the method splice. Now we've already used the method push. Splice does something similar. Splice takes in 2 parameters, and it's going to take away, in this case it's going to take away the ith element, or starting at the ith element, how many do I want to take away? And I just want to take away 1. So you can take, from the middle, the reason it's called splice is you can take any element out of the array and pop it off, or any group of elements, and it'll just splice the rest of the array back together. So you won't end up with an array with a hole in it. So that's what splice is going to do. And I'll do the same thing down here. I'll just take this remove child, and same thing down here, except instead of bullets, I'm going to remove the enemies. I'm going to take the J element from there, and I'll take this guy and I'll say the same thing. I'm going to go to enemies, and I will take the splice again, splice, and inside splice I'm going to take away the J element, and again I'm only going to be removing 1, and so that should do it. Now there's going to be a couple of problems with this. Let's go ahead and see if we can figure all the problems out. If I do this now, I'm going to get some errors eventually. Oh my goodness, it's not going to give me any errors. Well, there's still some things that I'm going to have to pay attention to. I think I should be getting some errors, because one of the things that can pop up, and did pop up for me before, is that in my enemy loop, if I go ahead and remove this, and if for some reason this guy doesn't exist, that's a problem. So the same thing I did before is I want to make sure that this guy exists, and to do that, all I have to do is take enemies with the enemy index, and again I want to test and make sure that this guy does not equal null. So when I call this method in my enemy class, if this guy doesn't exist, I'm going to run into some problems. So that is didn't show up as a problem that time, but it did for me before, and so that's how I fixed it. Don't know if that will show up. The other thing I did is it looks like these guys are right. When I didn't have this guy set right, I wasn't getting rid of the first element in the array. So remember that since the length, let's say I have a length of 10, and so that's going to go 0 through 9. And so if I were just to say variable I equals bullets.length, that would be bullets 10, which doesn't exist. So if the length is 10, the indices go 0 through 9, so that's why I'm subtracting 1 here. And I also have to subtract 1 here. Off by 1 errors. So they say there are 3 big problems. The 3 most common problems that programmers face are, number 1, naming errors, or naming things correctly, and off by 1 errors. Those are the big 3. Okay, moving on. Okay, now that we have our bullets popping off the screen, in this next little segment, what I want to do is also pay attention to when the bullets leave the play area, because right now I can shoot billions of bullets and these things are going off into space indefinitely, and that's not a good thing. And so I can easily get rid of them after they leave the area by doing just a couple of things real quickly. I can use an if statement, and not a phi statement, but an if statement, and I can say if this guy goes out of range. So if it goes out of the top, and so the bullet BI, I'm going to check these each time I come through here. After I say update bullet, I'm going to check and see if it's gone outside of the range. And so the way that I do that is I just say bullets, and I do my bullet index, just like I had before, but I want to say that if the x value is, let's say less than 0, that means it's gone too far to the left. However, I also want to pay attention to, and so I'm going to use my OR, and the way that I use OR is I just come in and I use the vertical lines, and I'm going to say if it has gone too far out this way, or if it has gone, let's say, bullets BI has gone, let's say, dot X has gone, if it's greater than the width of my stage, so let's say the width of my stage is 800, or if bullets BI is, let's say the Y coordinate is let's say less than 0, so I can say less than 0 here, or if bullets BI dot Y again is greater than the bottom of the stage, and I think that was let's say 700. And so basically these are my 4 statements, and to connect these all I have to do is use my OR. So the OR is located right above the enter sign. Just hit shift and it's right over backslash, so I hit 2 of those, and that's my OR statement. And so I'll do that again here, or this is true. I can do it again here, or this is true. So this one is going to be, unlike AND, OR works so that I've got 4 conditions. If any one of the 4 is true, then the whole statement evaluates to true, and I will do what's between these 2 curly brackets. Don't let the fact that these are on 4 different lines confuse you. I just didn't want to spread it out over here. But I've got if this is true, or if this is true, or if this is true. If any one of these 4 statements is true, then I want to remove the bullet. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did down here. I'm going to simply take this code, and inside here I'm going to remove it from the array. The one thing that is different that I need to pay attention to is that at this point, Notice that I have the index BI, so I want to make sure I use the index BI here and the index BI here. And at this point, actually, you know what, let's make these a little bit smaller so we can actually see them. Let's say we do 500 and 500 and 50 and 50, so we can actually see them disappearing. We can change those back in a minute, but let's see if this is going to work. As I come over here, notice, oh, they're not showing up because my turret is outside of the range. So instead of 500 here, let's say Y if it's greater than, oh, let's say 800. So we'll leave that guy where it was. And now I'll run it again. And this time we see them, but they're going to disappear. There's 500, so they disappear right away there, and so forth. So you can see the bullets disappearing when they go outside of that range. So let's change this back. If it's less than 0, if it's greater than, let's say, 800, if it is, let's say, less than 0, and if it is greater than 800. That should do it. Okay, so that's a little piece I wanted to add. Another little piece in this segment that we'll put in for the very first time is we're going to use a different type of method of checking to see when I can add enemies or shoot things, and we're going to use something called a timer. Now we can use the frames in the same way as we have before, but the timers are supposed to have the advantage of being more smooth, because if you have a whole bunch of code in one particular frame, let's say, that it could not, even though this is rated at 24 frames a second, each of those frames might not be exactly the same length of time, therefore your play might be a little bit jerky. Now I haven't tested this, but you can test it. At least you'll have the option. But I'm going to, from the Flash package, I want to add a timer. And to add a timer, all I need to do is use my, I say utils. So that's utils, and I will add the timer. Let's see, timer's right there. Good. So I add my timer, and the other thing that I'm going to have to import here is from the Flash events. I need to add a timer event, so I'll just say timer, and this will be a timer event, and now I can add a timer to my game. And timers are pretty easy to use. You add a timer as a variable. So right up here I'm going to add, first of all, I'll add a couple of different timers, but this first one is just going to be my enemy timer, and this enemy timer is going to be timer, enemy timer, and enemy timer is going to be a new timer. So I'll just say it is a type timer, and I will say equals new timer. Just like all my other objects that I create, I use that same format. var, I use my name, I use the type, and then I use the keyword new to instantiate it. I say the type again with parentheses, and that's going to create my timer for me. And then inside, so that's my variable, but inside the PhatKids class, I need to do a couple of things here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say enemy timer, and I need to start it. So one of the methods in a timer is the start method, so that's going to start my timer right when I go into my document class. And the other thing I need to do is I need to add an event listener, so I can say enemy timer, and I'm going to simply add to that timer an event listener, and the event listener is going to listen for a timer event. And so a timer event is what I imported up above. So it's going to know what that is, and it's going to simply take in the keyword timer. So I'll just collect that here. And now when I hit a timer event, I'm going to call a function, and I'll call it enemy timer, let's say tick. Now there's one other really crucial piece that we need to put back up in here. When I create this, there's two parameters that this takes. One is the number of milliseconds that pass between timer ticks. So for instance, if I put in 1,000 milliseconds, that's going to happen every second. And then the second thing is I need to have the number of ticks that I'm going to, or the number of timer events that I'm going to complete totally. So I'll go ahead and say 15, and this will give me exactly 15 timer ticks, and each of those will be 1 second apart. I've started it right here, and I go ahead, and every time I get one of those 15 ticks, I'm going to call this method. So let's go ahead and say public. Maybe this can be private. Let's see. It might need to be public later, but let's see. Private, and I'm going to take this guy, enemy timer tick. Now, what do I want to do when I get an enemy timer tick? Well, first of all, let's make sure I put my timer event, which is a timer event. That's my parameter coming in. I'm not going to return anything here, and I will simply add some code. And the one piece of code I'm going to have is a variable which is going to be Boolean, and it's going to be send enemy, and we'll set that equal to true. Every time I send a timer tick, I'm going to say send enemy is true, and so I need to actually create that variable. So again, I'll create a Boolean variable called send enemy, and this is going to be of type Boolean. And Boolean will be set equal to, let's say false to begin with. And so the first ticket will get set to true. Now the way that I use this is back where I init my enemy. So there's a init turret, there's make bullet, here's a init enemy. Instead of an enemy launch delay, which I don't need anymore, I'm going to have a variable here which is going to simply say send enemy. And I can say send enemy equals true, or I can just say send enemy. Since it's a Boolean, I can just simply leave this part off and just say send enemy. This is going to evaluate to either true or false. So if it's equal to true, I'll leave that in for now because it's a little bit easier to read, I think. And then, you know what, I really don't need max enemies anymore. I could take that out, and instead of having max enemies as less than 11, I could just change the number of timer ticks to whatever number of enemies I want. So if I changed this to 10, for instance, I'm only going to get 10 timer ticks, but the idea is when I come in here, I will create the enemy, and it'll go through this whole process. Let's see, bullet loop, bullets, init turret, make bullet, here it is, init enemy. So the only other thing I need to add is right here where it says init enemy, is I am going to say send enemy back equal to false. And it won't become true again until my next timer tick a second later. And so let's see if this works as such. I get a couple of errors. So let's check out where these errors are. Not enemy timer tick. And it's private. Let's go ahead and make this public. It says that, I need the word function, obviously. So that was silly. So let's go ahead and say public function enemy timer tick. Let's see what happens now. And now it doesn't know what an enemy timer is. So enemy timer, did I spell that differently? So here I have enemy timer, and here I have enemy timer. It looks the same. I've misspelled it here. Enemy timer. And so let's try that again. And now it doesn't know what this is. So let's take this. Wow, it still is misspelled. I'm the world's worst spell check person. So let's make sure these are all spelled the same. Try it one more time, and now it runs. And as I come up, the enemies are coming up exactly 1 second apart. If I change this to, for instance, 2,000, now they should be coming up every 2,000 milliseconds. I probably put 200 by mistake, which I did. So let's go ahead and run that again. And now they're going to come up every 2 seconds. Okay, so that's it for today. Bye-bye.